Greetings to all you freedom lovers all around the world. This is Proof of Pod, episode 9. Joining me today, we have Adam Haman of the wildly influential, says here, Substack, podcast, and YouTube show Haman Nature, where history, economics, and philosophy are examined through the lens of human nature. Adam writes and talks about everything and coaches people about poker. He's also active in the Libertarian Party of Nevada. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Hey, David, how are you? Are you taking issue with my self-description as being a wildly influential podcast? How dare you?
I just read what's written in front of me. Like the highest office in our land, the guy who occupies that.
Yeah, he does a great job. You might have even done as well as the man who holds the highest office in our land.
Is that all? Yes. I need some lessons. So, you and I met in Vegas playing mixed game poker.
Heck yeah.
Last week, I decided the podcast was at the point where I was gonna reach out, spam all my acquaintances, and to my great thrill, one of my poker frenemies, that's you, has his own podcast.
All the cool kids are doing it.
How long ago did you start Haman Nature?
I had been podcasting a little bit for the Libertarian Party of Nevada, starting, I don't know, early 2022 maybe. And that sort of petered out a little bit, but I really liked it. I liked getting on the mic and talking about liberty and interviewing people that were doing things, issue coalitions around in Nevada area. And then February of this year, I started the show Haman Nature on YouTube, and also a Substack with the same name, Haman Nature. So I write 3 or 4 times a week, and I podcast 2 or 3 times a week. And it's been going pretty great.
Actually, I don't even know. I'm trying to share it, but I'm not sure if it's recording for the podcast.
Yeah, I think so.
Nothing but professionalism here. Anyway, nice site.
Yeah, Substack
like
gives you a pretty nice site.
Yeah, layout. If somebody's coming from this channel and going to check out your articles and podcasts and whatever, what kind of content should they expect?
Well, the tag of my show is In Search of a Peaceful and Prosperous Society Using Human Nature as a Philosophical Guide, which sort of means I talk about everything. My last name is Haman.
Come on.
Yeah, there it is.
Picture.
7 years, maybe?
It's
not that long. So yeah, my last name's Haman. I call the show Haman Nature. It's because I think a lot about human nature, about what it is. I think we have a specific nature as a species, and I think it's sort of important to figure out how we should conduct ourselves, because the universe has a nature, and one nature should be in accordance with another. So I think a lot about economics, history, politics, political philosophy, epistemology, evolutionary psychology. And so I sort of talk about all of these things. Sometimes I frame it around something that's going on in the news. I'm involved in the Libertarian Party, so we talk about that a lot. And so I write, and then my partner on Haman Nature and I talk on the YouTube show just about all these things. And I hope it is interesting and educational. I think I don't always add new information, but I do think I often add a new perspective. And I think we become more powerful intellectually if we learn to adopt different frames of analysis, whether we think they're accurate or not necessarily. It's powerful to have that kind of mental flexibility and look at things from all sorts of different angles to try and figure out what's true and what's in accordance with our nature and what we ought to do. Sort of like that.
I mean, I'd definitely say, like, if you're getting your information from like Fox News and CNN and MSNBC and whatever, like,
Good
please,
luck.
you got to like seek out some alternatives, like the Haman Nature and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tyrone the Porcupine Hobo, speaking of your co-host, what's his story?
What is his story? Yeah, he's up in Minnesota.
Okay.
The animal logo for the Libertarian Party, like the donkey is for the Dems, the elephant is for the Republicans.
Right.
So that's the porcupine pod. I don't know what the hobo part is. I think you find a graphic that's cool, but Yeah, a buddy of mine had finished up a podcast run of his, and I was just talking to him, thinking I needed a partner. And just out of the blue, he recommended Tyrone, and it's been a great collaboration so far. He's uh, a great tit to my tat, a great zig to my zag. I think the show's pretty
So
fun
he's
and
a
funny.
tit.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm the tit. I don't know.
Okay, tit for tat. Got it. Got it. All right. When I was going through your channel and your articles, looking for a nice crossover intersection of content, the one that probably stood out the most would be Ross Ulbright, where you've written a couple articles, and we'll include the links to those in the description. And you even, I've been seeing you broadcast with the Free Ross sign.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah,
Right, right there. Right there. Yeah, in the Libertarian National Convention in DC this year, we waved those furiously in front of Donald Trump's face as he tried to win our, I don't know, support or something.
yeah,
And he said, and he has said since several times that one of his first acts, and if he were to win the presidency, would be to free Ross Ulbright, which
yeah,
that's worth something.
yeah.
I mean, he's been, I don't know how much your audience knows about his story, but that guy has been screwed over by the government, and liberty-loving people ought to care.
I don't think our the viewers on my channel know much about it. So, if you're ready, you want to
Sure.
tell us the story?
Yeah, this guy, back in the early days of Bitcoin, started a underground digital marketplace called the Silk Road. And he operated anonymously, calling himself the Dread Pirate Roberts, hat tip to the Princess Bride. And it was, you had to get there, on the dark web using a Tor browser or whatever. And it was a place like eBay, I guess, where you can buy and sell things using nothing but Bitcoin. And like 70 or 80% of it was drugs. Um, some of it was like fake IDs or stuff. And then some ancillary stuff that, you know, entrepreneurs thought might be interesting to an underground marketplace. He only had a handful of rules, like there couldn't be any fraud, and you couldn't like buy and sell anything that could be harmful to someone else, like not weapons or stuff like that. Um, but anyway, he was he was tooling around on that for quite some time until I think it was Gawker wrote a hit piece on the Silk Road.
Hmm.
And I think that's when the government finally kind of really took notice and started to get embarrassed. So they hunted the guy using all the resources at the disposal of the federal government for over a year and a half. They couldn't find him. And then finally, using some nefarious FBI tactics, they finally did catch this guy.
Hmm.
On the run up to the trial, they floated throughout the media that he would have been involved in a hitman scheme, like a money for murder for hire sort of thing. That was all complete nonsense, but that is what they do. They poison the national jury pool because why not? At the end of it, they actually only prosecuted him for 7 crimes, all of which had having to do with drug trafficking and computer crimes, things like that.
Hmm.
And for this first offender, this non-violent offender, for running a website, not even selling drugs himself, just having a platform, he got 2 back-to-back life sentences plus 40 years, which seems to me to be a wee bit heavy-handed.
Yeah, I mean, like they could have taken off the 40 years.
Right. So he is locked away in Tucson, I believe, a federal penitentiary. And there's a lot to say about this. I mean, I think one of the reasons the feds did what they did, and here I'm a poker player. I try to read people, can't read minds, but I think what happened is they got embarrassed by this guy because not only was he quietly running a digital marketplace, he was penning anonymous posts under the name Dread Pirate Roberts that were libertarian in nature. They were downright Rothbardian. For those of you who read Murray Rothbard, he was talking about how we don't need government. I mean, not just shrink it down to nothing, but get rid of it altogether. We can have governance and order and peace and prosperity without having it being provided by a monopolist. And at the core of it is this digital money, Bitcoin, and they can't do anything about it. And he's singing the virtues of how we can just get around their central bank currency, and he was sort of proving it, like I said, for over a year and a half. And I think that's why they threw, forget the book, they threw the whole library at this kid, who I believe was 26 or 27 when he got thrown in jail, I think. Don't quote me on that.
So, like, if he's creating a website where illegal drugs are being bought and sold, why shouldn't he go to prison?
Well, I am a libertarian. I believe you own your body, and it's your responsibility and freedom about what you put in that body. Of course, we know there are societal harms that tend to come with drug use, not always, but they can. And if you choose to use drugs, all that ancillary stuff is on you. If you commit crimes or pass out in a public park, and I'm not for that at all. But it goes against. I'm all for policing those things. That's the stealing, which our modern police system doesn't seem to care about too much less passing out drunk in public or stoned in public or whatever.
Hmm.
But I think the only thing they focus on is the only thing that's peaceful, the peaceful part, which is doing drugs. And even if you think it's immoral to do drugs, you have to ask yourself whether you fix that societal harm best by adding another evil on top called prohibition, with all the distrust in government that comes with it, the corruption, the bribery. They cannot actually keep drugs out of prisons, for crying out loud.
Right.
So do you really want to live in a society where they actually try to keep drugs off the city streets? What is it? How are they going to treat the citizenry if they actually take that task to heart? I don't think you want to live in that world, even if you're the most puritanical conservative there is. So, yeah, this kid shouldn't have gotten a year, a second in prison for establishing a marketplace for selling drugs. That's just not what the government should be doing.
If somebody sold on like Amazon Marketplace or whatever it's called, like peer-to-peer drugs or something else like that, could they arrest Jeff Bezos?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, the conspiracy theory is that the CIA forced him to buy the Washington Post, right? So he's a controlled asset. They wouldn't arrest him.
Uh,
I'm not saying that's true, but I don't know if they would or they wouldn't, but I bet they wouldn't throw the book at him. I bet he'd get a slap on the wrist. I think it was because Bitcoin was new and they were scared of it and they were embarrassed by this kid. Um, the the Silk Road threatened the monopolistic state in a way that Amazon Prime just doesn't. Even if they got mad at him, at Bezos, for selling heroin or something.
have you ever watched the show Cops?
Uh, long, long ago.
I don't think I've ever seen an episode, but it was on in a without the sound in a poker room where I play recently. It seems like the whole show is just cops picking on poor people.
Yeah. Yeah, I assume that they do the auditions for the show. You got to show up wearing a wife beater and be completely incoherent, and then the cops chase you around for a while.
I mean, there's a lot to it. I mean, I personally don't really blame the individual cops for anything other than their own actions, right? An individual cop
Sure.
might do something wrong, but I don't blame a person for being a cop for wrong that some other cop does. Um, but it's like this there seems to be this systematic, and this is not a new idea for me, but there's like this systematic preference where rich people, go to rehab for drugs and poor people go to jail for drugs. And, I mean, like, it's hardly a double-blind scientific study, but I mean, if you look at the show Cops, like, you can see it writ large.
Yeah, I mean, it's been sort of a saying for a long time that your money and your rights are one and the same. And what else would you expect in a system that's A, enforced by a monopoly provider, there can't be any competition, and B, exactly how justice is dispensed is decided using the political means rather than any other? Well, what would you expect other than the most well-heeled, politically connected people in our society having a different tier of justice than the rest of us? I mean, that makes perfect sense. The system is the result, or the design is the. There's another saying there. I'm losing, but if you look at the design, you can tell what the end process is going to be, and oppression of the poor and unconnected, the people that the system just doesn't care about, a political system. Yeah, of course they're going to chase those people around, and hey, let's film it too, like a day at the zoo. Who cares, right?
Yeah, this isn't the expression you're thinking of, but it's kind of like a feature, not a bug.
You're right, exactly.
I was talking to somebody recently, and I was just kind of explaining how, like, everybody in theory wants to balance the budget, but nobody wants their piece to be reduced or whatever. And
Sure. Yeah.
you know, this person, she was like, well, why not? Why don't they just like all give up, give back 10% or whatever, and we could balance the budget, a few years. And I'm like, well, they just don't want to. Like it's working for them. Like,
Right. The people who make the decisions, the system isn't broken for them. It's working just as designed. It's working badly for us.
right.
And unfortunately, we don't have a lever or a button that we can switch to influence this system. I mean, there's another great saying that, if voting actually made a difference, they'd make it illegal. The systems are both left and right are crony. They they choose somebody that's compliant and make it so that only they filter through the primary process to become one of your two choices. This is the presidential level, obviously, which is what makes Donald Trump so interesting. For all of his many, many, many faults, he was not part of the system, and he was not controllable. That's why they freaked out about him.
Yeah, I mean, not to pick on the Democrats, but their primaries, like, there's only been one that even resembles like a free and open primary since Barack Obama elected in 2012.
What would he have been? He would have been eight, wouldn't he? 28, 2008.
Yeah, you're probably right. 2008. That makes sense. You're right. 2008. So 2012, it was Obama because he was still in office. 2016, it was just kind of like handed to Hillary. 2020 seemed like, at least on the surface, a fair competition. And this year, then, uh, presumed to be Biden and then just like handed off with, no
Well, I
real.
know at least one person on the left who doesn't think the primary process for the Democrats in 2016 and 2020 is fair. And he's a little populist socialist Jewish fella called Bernie Sanders.
Sure.
I believe he would take objection to that framing because, and I think he's right, the Democratic Party just screwed him.
Yeah.
Much like the GOP did to Ron Paul, in '08 and 2012, they just used the power of the machine to tilt the tilt the playing field and just make sure he couldn't get in.
Yeah. 2016 is one of the ones that I counted as, just completely patently,
Yeah.
obviously on the surface, not fair. 2020, I think at least to a first approximation looked fair.
They were more subtle there. There, I think it was more along the lines of leaning on particular people that would take away the progressive populist support and split that up so that the regime candidate could shoulder past him,
Yeah.
keeping, I don't know, Elizabeth Warren and people like that in and getting other people that were more. Anyway, that's just the way it looked to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Democratic primaries are perfectly fair.
Yeah. So, like, what's your personal experience with cryptocurrency or your outlook?
I detest central banks and fiat money imposed upon us by force. So anything that has a chance of giving us another option or, edging out that corrupt system, I'm, just sort of intellectually in favor of. I love the way it's created. I love the decentralized nature. I love the blockchain. I love that it's peer to peer without an intermediary that you have to trust. The design is beautiful as far as I'm concerned. My only problem is, that it's not backed by anything. I'm a certain age, so I believe that money originated as a commodity, even though its exchange value, is multiples more valuable than its use case value. But there's something about it that just makes me think that a money has to be a commodity. But of course, I'm epistemologically honest enough to know that that's not true. Money is whatever is widely accepted, and that could be anything from seashells to cigarettes to um, a funny looking stone in the middle of your island in Micronesia, to gold, to silver, to dollars that are backed by nothing, to, okay, a Bitcoin decentralized internet protocol that's backed by nothing. We can make that money. And I just love the fact that it's inherently deflationary, which is wonderful. There's only going to be 21 million of them, and a bunch of those have been lost, I think. And the fact if we actually had an honest hard money that was not increasable. Like as much as I love gold, what would happen if an asteroid full of gold sort of peacefully landed on the planet? That would cause
Yeah.
the markets to be in chaos. But
Or
if we had a solid
we pull
money
it
that was,
down, like maybe Elon Musk is
yeah, like
planning to
Elon
send
might
a
go grab us one. Yeah,
rocket
exactly.
out there to get a asteroid full of gold.
But if we had a money that its numerical value could not increase, then the naturally increasing productive power of our species as we get better tech and new tech and learn how to use these resources that are around us and our own skills, that would mean prices would lower as our society advanced, which is what it's supposed to look like.
Right.
Wretchedly horrible, stupid crony economists have been trying to teach us that deflation is bad. The market couldn't coordinate. Producers wouldn't know how much to bid for inputs. Well, it's all nonsense.
Right.
We have plenty of areas of our current economy in which prices are deflationary, like the electronics, famously computers. It's all that's important is that the entrepreneur can identify a spread between his costs to purchase inputs and the final cost of sale. That's not that hard to do. So yeah, give me a sound money. We are just being robbed every day by a central bank, and for some reason nobody's pissed off about it.
So how do you think that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies align with, the libertarian ideal? You kind of touched on it already, but
Yeah, I mean it's not that it.
maybe the better question would be like how are they deviating from the libertarian ideal?
I mean, strictly speaking, the thing that makes it part of a libertarian ideal is just that you'd have a free market in money. And if Bitcoin became widely used, well, it just wins, the freely chosen market battle, and I'm totally fine with that.
Right.
It satisfies beautifully all the classic um, characteristics of money that you'd want. It's non-perishable. It's almost perfectly divisible, I guess perfectly. It's super easy to transport, super easy to send. I'm sure there's a handful of others that I'm forgetting. So yeah, technically it's amazing. My only complaint with it is that it's technically not a commodity. Although, I mean, over time, maybe you'd start to think that it was. Is an NFT a commodity? And the other thing is that, oh, that gives me pause is it's inherently reliant on electricity and digital equipment working.
Right.
I envision the huge sunspot or the magnetic poles of the Earth shift or something, and then all of a sudden the money doesn't work. But again, if I'm arguing against myself, nothing will work, and we're all about to be eating each other and rioting in the streets if something like that were to happen. So maybe it's no big deal.
When we've all got a cyber chip in our brain or whatever, like will
Right,
it work better or worse?
right.
Probably better, but maybe it would be completely obviated, like completely useless at that point.
I imagine one guy right before the whole grid collapses, printing out, the blockchain. And then, because paper is so fragile, maybe he'll just start chiseling it into a cave wall or something. And future archaeologists will really have something to think about.
For sure. Something you mentioned, epistemology. While it's not directly tied to cryptocurrency, I think this is just so important. Like, I feel, okay, first of all, epistemology, I think of it as how do we know what we know or what we think we
Right,
know? Is
right.
that,
No, that's exactly the definition I use too. I mean, it's a big, fancy, stupid word. It just means the philosophy of knowledge, I think.
uh,
But yeah, how do you know what you know? Why should you trust, the evidence of your senses? Why should you trust the conclusions you come to in your own head? What do you do about things people say to you? Um, we are a species that omniscience is not given to us, no matter what the Christians tell you. Our senses are fallible, our logic is fallible, our news sources are fallible, and yet we have to cross the street to get a loaf of bread. We have to act in this world, so we have to make decisions. And so, what do you do with that conundrum? And I think the answer to that is complicated and meaningful. It has a lot of layers to it. And so I think about it a lot. We have to act on the basis of varying levels of confidence and knowledge all the time. And most of us don't really think about it. And I think the more that you do, um, it's not a superpower exactly, but at least it keeps you from being intellectually crippled and just believing the first thing that comes along, or again, also being frozen into inaction because the world is so complex and unknowable. You know what? That's not the right side to fall on either. So it's a balancing act and it's work and it's valuable. So I think about it a lot.
I hate to be like conspiracy theory about it, but I
Oh,
feel
do it. Do
like
it.
I feel like this isn't taught as much in school as it otherwise would be because a lot of people who are teaching don't want people questioning how they know what they know. Like, how do we know that we live in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Or how do we know that one nation indivisible, right?
No, I totally agree. I don't think it's an accident that there's far fewer college level courses on propaganda in 2024 than there probably were like 40 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, I think I think the powers that be in government funded schools would just assume that you not think that the government uses propaganda to influence the citizenry for various purposes. Like,
Propaganda is bad, Adam.
right. Especially when we got to go fight the Huns, right? I mean, ever since World War One, heck, ever since remember the Maine, government has been using propaganda to fool us into going along with whatever the powerful elites want to use our blood and treasure to accomplish. And you should treat them suspiciously. You should look upon all their claims with skepticism. And the same, coming from lunatics, Alex Jones types or whoever, or me, don't just reflexively believe anybody. Triangulate if you can. You should probably watch Fox News a little bit. You should watch MSNBC a little bit or CNN, and then a bunch of other sources that you think are more honest brokers, and just try and triangulate a little bit. Even if you know somebody's lying, there's some, I mean, you're a poker player, there's some value in reading what somebody is broadcasting, even if you think they're trying to be deceptive. If you know what their bias is, you can find some hints as to what the truth is by what they're saying or what they're not saying or what they're emphasizing, what they're leaving out and some other news broker is putting in. It's just complicated. You can't, I don't know if it was ever true that you could turn on the nightly news and get the God's honest truth from Cronkite, but it sure isn't true now, and that's okay. You just gotta roll with it.
Right. They had to appeal to a broader base, right? Like with three channels, you couldn't have one channel that just like went after the 20% of the population that's like hardcore Republican or the 20% that's hardcore Democrat or whatever.
It's interesting on that point, real briefly.
Yeah,
I do think we gain from having the gatekeepers, lose their authority. The gates are still there, as they say, but the fence is down. So instead of three networks, we have a zillion.
right.
I think we on net we gain, but I also must acknowledge that we sort of lose something in cultural cohesion since we're not all sort of sharing the same cultural reference points.
Hmm.
And I don't want to go back, but I do think it's something to reflect upon, which is why I like viral memes so much. They sort of give everybody a cultural touchstone, or super popular shows like Game of Thrones or whatever. I don't want to lose the things that we all experience that sort of unite us. It would be a shame if those all just went to zero.
Yeah. So I have a answer or a couple answers to this, but I'm not 100% sure of, but I'd like to hear
Good.
what you think. Why is it that a channel like Fox News, which is not quite blatant, but you know very much influenced to the right side, why is that popular? Why couldn't somebody make a channel that was like fair and balanced and succeed?
Well, there's a couple of different answers. The one is if it were honest, they wouldn't get financed by big pharma and the military industrial complex. And there are other, maybe not network shows, but there are other news channels that have popped up and they've had varying degrees of success. But the bigger reason, if I had to put on my entrepreneur hat, is that the people who still consume Fox News don't really want a honest broker. They want what information comes from their silo. They like their bubble. They want their myths reinforced. They just want to hear about those dirty libtards and how stupid and silly they are, and they don't really want the errors and crimes coming from their own side being exposed. Unfortunately, Although there is a market for honesty, it's narrow. There's still a lot of money being made, especially on the left, just catering to their biases and telling the public what they want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, those are my two answers too. I think the easier, more on the surface answer to come up with is like that's what people want. And I think that's probably true. But I don't know how influential that aspect is to it versus like the federal budget is $6 trillion or something like this, right? And that buys you a
Crazy.
lot of good PR, right? So if you're gonna I don't know how much of the federal budget in one way or another, gets uh, indirectly or directly funneled to channels that, are mouthpieces for the federal government, but it doesn't have to be a very high percentage for it to be like much higher than Fox News's whole budget.
Oh man, I totally agree. And even if that weren't a thing, the regime could still control the major outlets simply by withholding or granting access to interviews for the public officials because that's your stock in trade. And if you give me a bad interview or print the wrong thing, maybe I withhold access and give it to your competitor. So it doesn't even have to be financial pressure. Just the regime tends to get what it wants from its mouthpiece because it has, it can withhold or bestow benefits upon whoever says and does the right thing. And that's really, really powerful before you even get to the cronyism, which is rampant.
Yeah. And if you're saying something that the authorities don't like, you might wind up in jail with 2 life sentences plus 40.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote a piece on Ross. I first met his mother, who's just amazing. I think it was 2017 on the Contra Cruise put on by Tom Woods and Bob Murphy, based on their show Contra Krugman. And he had Lynn Ulbricht on, who's just nonstop been petitioning public. Yeah, Ross to get her son released. She's just been an Energizer bunny of activism on the subject, which is beautiful to see. Um, Anyway, I was writing about the thing because we had an event out here in Vegas during Freedom Fest for her and for Ross, and we were talking about why did the government, turn a 5-year offense max into life plus 40, and I think it literally had so much to do with the money issue. Do not screw with the government's money. And I told a little story. I don't know if you were in Vegas during this time, but during the late 80s and presumably before, but I first saw it in the late 80s, early 90s. Um, Casino gambling chips, the checks, were much more widely circulated than they are now. You literally could, stand up from the roulette table or whatever, grab your chips, color up to your heart's content, and then just walk out the door. And you could go to like a Denny's or something and give them a $25 chip for your breakfast, and they'll give you fiat money in change, and they'll just eventually get around to returning that chip to the. And you could go to other casinos and just bet with the chip from another casino, and they trade them out for you. And then they almost had a check clearinghouse system, where they would just settle sorry, they would just exchange the chips back, and it wasn't a problem. And then Washington DC heard about this and figuratively rolled the tanks. They made it clear that if you wanted to stay in operation, you better stop this. Um, and think about it. If you had a monopolistic counterfeiter that was forcing everybody to use its counterfeit paper on pain of death through legal tender laws, you obviously wouldn't want the populace getting the idea that they could just switch to another form of currency. That would be bad if you were the counterfeiter in chief. So I think that's why they went at Ross so hard.
Yeah, my first visit to Vegas was 2007. So I wasn't around. I never bought anything at Denny's with a poker chip. But for a while, we were playing with $100 bills at the table.
That's right. Yeah,
And from what I'm told, the federal government put a stop to that.
they did.
Um, I worked at WSOP 1 year as a dealer. And I think that year they had switched to no chip runners, which is somebody who takes your money at the table and brings you chips, as a convenience, because the feds had slapped, if I remember right, I was told it was like $10 million worth of fines for like money laundering violations because the chip runners were not reporting properly
Right.
your buy-ins to
Right.
the IRS,
Right.
which a lot of people don't have any idea that kind of thing is going on. And yeah, like it's become more and more stringent about using your chips from one casino to another casino. Again, from what I understand, due to federal pressure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you look at it as if, Murray Rothbard was right and the government is just a criminal gang writ large, if you look at it from the perspective of that criminal gang, well, their actions make total sense. These rules are not for our benefit, they're for theirs.
Yeah. I made an analogy on this show a couple episodes ago about somebody brought up to me that good money drives out bad money, right? And I was saying, well, good money drives, I'm sorry, bad money drives out good money.
Hopefully. Is that Grisham's law? Is that the
Gresham's law,
law?
yeah, yeah.
Grisham.
But my point was that the good money is driven into savings, whereas it's only driven out of the circulation.
Bad gets driven into circulation. Yeah.
Yeah, bad gets driven into circulation, good gets driven into savings, or possibly melted down if it's,
Sure.
specie. Yeah. And I was saying like the poker chips are kind of like money, and they're a worse form of money in almost every way, except for to play poker with.
All right.
And so the bad money of the poker chips kind of drives out the good money of the dollars at the poker table, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny. You've got fiat dollars, crowding out real money by force of law, and then you've got us creating something to use instead of that.
Yeah.
It's weird, it's levels upon levels upon levels of replacing one kind of money with the other. And then
Yeah.
maybe you are right, and I'm hopefully that Bitcoin replaces all of that. Who the heck knows?
Yeah, well, that's actually not my position. I don't think Bitcoin is going to replace everything. I think Bitcoin has its use or uses rather. But
If it only
yeah.
exists as a store of value, I don't think it's long for this world.
Mhm.
Because I truly believe that for it to be money, it has to do all those three things, which are three faces of the same uh, use case: store of value, unit of account, and medium of exchange. And if
Good.
it is just another asset, um, I don't think it's certainly not going to be what Satoshi, if that was a real person, envisioned. Um, I think it'll
So
be much, much lesser and much more vulnerable too as an asset class. It could be like the tulip in Holland and wherever that was, the 1600s, that just goes to zero or near zero.
yeah.
I don't know.
So to frame this a little bit, you want to talk about money qua money. Can you
Yeah, I mean, I
explain like
guess
what
we.
that phrase means?
Yeah, I mean, qua is just what fancy Latin for the thing as it is, or something like that. And I guess we have been talking about it a little bit.
Yeah.
There are people that are hard money gold purists who would certainly want to talk about it in that framing. And I'm much more of a subjective theory of value guy. I recognize that we can use whatever we want if we all collectively will it. But I think that hallucinations tend to evaporate eventually. I think the fiat dollar will do so. The tulips did. Shells didn't last. And I fear that, the ones and zeros that are in this particular open source code framework, as powerful as it is, and even though it has the very powerful first mover advantage, I worry that it will go to the zero that's the other half of its one. But I wouldn't bet on it because I don't know. Um, we were speaking earlier. You came on my show and you presented your how did you frame it? Your Bitcoin maximalist acid test or something like that?
Medley's test of Bitcoin maximalism.
There it is. Yeah. And obviously, I think there's some value in Bitcoin, at least as compared to the alternative, which would be multiples of an EFT of all other coins that currently are in existence. I think that's the way you framed it, and I think I chose 1,000x would be what I would want in nominal dollars
Right. So that's a
to.
score of 100,000 on the 100,000% on the medley test, which puts
Yeah,
you
well, I'm
solidly in the maximalist camp, at least versus other cryptos.
yeah, I've been thinking about it for a little while, and I'm fine. And the reason I go so high is because 10 years is a long time. If it were a shorter, a shorter time period, I'd obviously accept less. Um, yeah, but it means that I think there's something to Bitcoin. I can't wrap my head around exactly what that thing is. I think I heard a long time ago somebody argue that it actually is it its value couldn't go to zero because it has like gold is an actual thing, it's a commodity, but what Bitcoin is that can't go to zero is uh, the decentralized distribution of nodes. Its transmission function is a good in and of itself, rather than just, only the value of the currency or something like that.
Well, here's how it could go to zero. No human in the world will take anything and will give you anything of value for it.
That'll do it right there. Yep.
It is shocking, stunning to me that like the FTX token still has value. Like, so
That's
if FTX
amazing.
won't go to zero, like Bitcoin's not going to zero either.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Do you think that'll persist?
I don't know. I wish I knew. I'm not sure what it is that makes people think like, hey, I want FTX. I'll trade you.
Well, let me throw this hypothesis past you. Maybe, I mean, we're a species that was swinging in trees and living in caves not that long ago. And now we're trying to evaluate economic value in this bewildering digital world that none of us understand very much at all.
Yeah.
And so maybe we're just hypnotizing ourselves into thinking that these clearly useless things have value, and that's why they do have value. And how far can you push that? How much wind can you fill your sails full of with hypnosis and groupthink?
Well, I mean, you know, gold and dollars and Bitcoin and all that stuff have value because people think they have value. Even a
Yeah.
car has value because I think it's worthwhile to get in my car and drive somewhere instead of walking or taking a bike or whatever, you know. If driving cars was completely outlawed or completely abandoned by all humans, like, well, I guess you could still scrap it for something, right? So it would have to, all the components would also have to be completely used,
Or a
valueless.
negative value. It could have a negative value if if it was a
Right.
detriment to a property value where it
That's
was.
true.
You had to get rid of it, and
That's
somebody's got
true.
to come take it away.
Like sometimes you'll hear that like the worst house in the best neighborhood like
Right.
is worth more once the house has been flattened. So the house actually has a negative value then.
Yeah, absolutely. These are all these are all great ways to think about the problem. And I guess the thing that answers them all is time. Especially if coercive force weren't involved and we just had a free market in currencies, all these questions would get answered in time as people freely chose to use them or not. The thing that messes this all up is the evil 800-pound gorilla in the room that forces this one thing on us and taxes us if we try to use the other and just gets in our way and throws Ross Ulbright in jail forever.
Yeah.
It's makes it hard to value things.
Well, I mean, like this is one of Bitcoin's big leg ups. If you tried to make what was the guy in Hawaii who made like Liberty dollars or the Paul dollar or whatever, if you try to do that, they will arrest you.
Yeah, he did,
But
right? He got arrested or threatened with it at least.
yeah, I think all his, silver stores or whatever it was got confiscated. And um, so Bitcoin is, in my opinion, solving a problem that we can't solve with, specie and notes and stuff like that because they will just grab you or confiscate or arrest you.
Yeah, it's depressing but true. On the other hand, I don't think we're going to be able to defeat this Leviathan with muskets the way we did, the last time. I think it's going to die the way all empires die in horrific decline, and it'll be painful. But if we can get parallel institutions up and running to do the societal functions that we currently rely on government for, I think we'll be in a prime position for when it weakens to the point that it can't enforce its edicts anymore.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I'm gonna live as much as free as I can. That's my main goal. I'm not trying to free 300 million people who don't want to be free.
Amen.
All right, let me ask you this. The We're gonna look at the three kind of main functions of money: means of exchange, store of value, and unit of count. Okay. The U.S. dollar, does it succeed as a means of exchange?
Sure.
Does it succeed as a store of value?
Sure, to some extent.
Uh,
I mean, these
and
aren't
does
binary questions, right?
correct? Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, it obviously does. The threat, of course, is that we have seen fiat money come crashing down or go into hyperinflation. And that's, we don't want the thing that is the lifeblood of our civilization, or at least a super important component, to do that. We want money is important to a complicated society. And so we want something that the risk of that happening is zero, and that's not the case with the US dollar. The risk of that is high.
And unit of account. Does the dollar succeed in that?
Sure.
Right. So then, like, we could compare the dollar to gold. Is the dollar better or worse? Let's say gold. Is gold better or worse than the dollar as a medium of exchange?
Yeah, we were talking about this on my show a little bit, and I think it's identical as a unit of exchange. It- like you were saying, you don't want to go walking around town with pieces of gold or even pieces of silver in your pocket to try and exchange them because that would be silly, and that's of course true. But all you're really exchanging in the marketplace isn't the actual pieces of gold. You're exchanging ownership titles of that. And that can be done with paper, that can be done with digital medium. You can do all your transactions on a little plastic electronic card, just like we do today. Since again, it's ownership titles that transfer. So yeah, I think gold is perfectly acceptable as a unit of exchange, even if you're going down to, you know, tenths of an atom of it.
Uh-huh.
If it
Wait,
ever
wait.
became that
Ten
widespread.
tenths of an atom? Maybe just one atom.
Even that, I mean, you wouldn't be able to put a tenth in your pocket, but you could have tenths of an ownership claim, right? If they were held in a,
Yeah, that's true.
it's
Like, yeah.
it'll never happen, thank God. But conceptually speaking, yeah, I think any amount of money will do, as long as you have an accounting system, and we do. So yeah, I think it's a wonderful unit of exchange.
Okay. Is gold a better or worse store of value than the US dollar?
I say much better. The only caveat I would add is that, like anything else, the value of gold is subjective. And if for some reason we all got turned off of it and liked palladium better or platinum or coconuts for some reason, then quote unquote as a store of value, it would suffer because it would have suffered as a money because it no longer was the most desired medium of exchange. But dollars are terrible. As they're being counterfeited, the purchasing power of them is being inflated away. So gold is vastly better than money or, dollars.
I do like coconuts. Is
Clearly,
gold
look at your background.
is gold better or worse than dollars as a unit of account?
I would say better because it's a better store of value. The length of the yardstick doesn't change.
Now, is Bitcoin better or worse than dollars as a medium of exchange?
Better.
Bitcoin's better than dollars.
Except people aren't using it widespread. I mean, yeah, I'd have to ask you, like, do you mean right the second, or do you mean like in theory? Um, there's some sort of a problem with needing electronics to transfer the ownership that maybe makes it a worse medium of exchange. If you're at the beach or whatever, and maybe you got something in your pocket that's not going to get ruined by the salt water or the sun or what. I don't know. Uh, I think Bitcoin is a fine medium of exchange. I think there are problems with it, but I think the problems of the US dollar are much, much worse. So, my complicated answer.
Okay. Is Bitcoin a better store of value than the US dollar?
I don't know. It's the tulip bulbs in Holland. I just don't know.
And would you say Bitcoin is a better unit of account than the dollar?
I mean, there's nothing keeping it from being a good unit of account except the problems that come from the other two elements of this question. If it loses its value, it's a poor medium of account. Um, but ignoring that difficulty, yeah, it's fine. It's lovely. It's digital. It's great.
So, my thesis is that money is as money does, right? And even when we try to list the uses of money, we're just like trying to categorize these things in our head. It doesn't actually, the real world, it doesn't fall neatly into these three categories.
True.
We could even talk about like poker chips as money and all that kind of stuff and calorie shells and all that kind of stuff. And I believe that we can try and quantify each of these as how good of money they are with like these three categories and other things. But really the value of the money is how useful it is at accomplishing the purposes of money, these three and anything else that might occur. So to me, my thesis is that Bitcoin right now is not a good medium of exchange, at least in the United States, as dollars. It's a much better store of value, and it's a much worse unit of account because it fluctuates so much. But I believe that because you said like if it's only a store of value, it can't survive, it will go to zero. Well, I don't think it is only a store of value. I
Yeah, I
just think
wouldn't
that
say
that's where it's
zero.
shining.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it
Yeah.
was zero. I would say it's capped at being whatever kind of an asset class it is.
Hmm.
I would think of it as more like an NFT rather than a money.
Hmm.
But yeah, I wouldn't say go to zero necessarily. And I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I had a thought,
No. Yeah,
which
yeah.
is so
Please, please.
weird. I have to share it. Um, what is or is not money in a group of people is dependent upon the collective subjective whims of that populace. And if all of a sudden they had some sort of weird psychological aversion to electricity or something, or to digital things, um, or maybe some super popular show came on TV that was all about gold, 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 such that it infected the populace that they just loved gold. Just those stupid things would be enough to flip, the usefulness of gold or Bitcoin as money from one side to the other. This is a pernicious thing. Which is why you sort of understand why ancient kings and rulers and modern central banks, tried to A, seize control of this so they could profit by it, but B, like try to make a uniform system. I mean, I'm sure not all of these people were doing these things because they thought it was evil. They were trying to establish order, not recognize that, not recognizing that the means are the ends, and anything you try to achieve by evil means is just going to be evil. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah.
But order is something we want. I mean, it's a human need as much as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, like gold is like culturally relevant in some places more than others. And if that kind of like gold fever spread, then the value of gold would rise.
Do you have any? I have no insight on this at all, no perspective. But do you have any ideas since you're in the Bitcoin world, you must be sort of parallel to the gold world. Do you have any opinion on what various central banks around the world have been doing in order to manipulate the value of gold? A lot of people have theories about this, but I don't know what to make of them all.
I don't know the answer.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people who think that gold and silver should be higher have been claiming for a long time that the prices are being artificially held down. You know, all kinds of derivatives could be used for this purpose. Like if you didn't like gold or silver, you could sell all your gold and silver, but that would be the extent of your influence over the market, right?
Yeah.
But then when you have something like futures, you can sell gold and silver without owning it. So you sell more than you could ever possibly have. And I know that there's accusations that JP Morgan Chase and places like this just like short gold and silver all the time to keep it down. it seems to me like it would eventually come tumbling down if that were actually the case. Um, Certainly, like for some company like Chase, it seems like the cost would become too heavy if they're intentionally holding the price down. Like there's a cost associated to that.
Sure.
Um, but a central bank could theoretically do it, right? Like they print up $1 trillion and nobody's really auditing them, and they use that $1 trillion to short silver and short gold, and maybe they lose 10%, but that's only 100 billion, and they can just print up another trillion the next year and cover that shortfall. I'm not really sure.
How insane is it that we live in a system where that is a thing that they could do?
Right.
Remember, a couple times in the last 15 years or so, they floated the idea of minting a coin and just saying it was worth $1 trillion, and then the Fed would just buy it for an actual trillion US dollars because they can do that. And we all just think, yeah, that's okay. That makes perfect sense. I'm just gonna go get a sandwich.
Yeah, I mean it's just sophistry, right? Like we already know that they can print $1 trillion,
Right.
but it's the Treasury can't print it. The Federal Reserve can.
Yeah.
So
Makes all
the
the difference in
Treasury,
the world. Yeah.
yeah. So the Treasury, however, can mint. So they could mint $1 trillion coin made out of platinum or something, and then sell it to the Fed, who can print. Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't
we're
matter.
You bring up sophistry. That's exactly right. We live in a world where they can do this. And then we slaves sit around in our cells arguing about whether the Fed is a private entity or is it a government entity or what are you arguing about? They can counterfeit the money that you're forced to use. You're literally having your life's work being siphoned away from you to the extent that money is a substitute for the effort you've put out to create value, years of your life or whatever. They can siphon that away from you in their bedroom just hitting a button on a computer screen.
Sure.
It's madness.
And people think about it too much in terms of savings and like inflation and stuff. Like they are siphoning from you right now.
And
Okay.
in the
Like,
future, yeah.
yeah, if there's 100 million people and they work a job and they get $1,000 for that job in a week, let's say, so that's $100 billion. Okay. And they, because of that $100 billion, they have control over what happens, what gets produced, what comes to them, what they take ownership of. But if the Federal Reserve in the same week prints $100 billion and gives it to their cronies or whatever, that, that those cronies have just as much control over what is created, produced, transferred in that week as the 100 million people who worked a full week of their lives to
A
get it. And
yeah,
so
point.
it doesn't have to be like the grocery bill goes up over time. They are stealing from you now in real time without it
I
having to
totally
show up in consumer inflation.
I totally agree. They're stealing from you right now and they're stealing from you in the future. My partner Tyrone, the porcupine hobo, brings this point up a lot, and he blames many of our social ills on the fiat money system. And one of the system-wide, society-wide effects that it has is to raise time preference. Which is civilizationally destroying. The thing that made us grow as a species from just rooting around in the mud was being able to think about working for the future, saving our effort, saving capital, lowering our time preference so that we can grow and build and become more productive. And when you create the chaos in a complicated system like we have, like again, the 800-pound gorilla who's just stealing from us every day, stealing from our future, ruining the money that we use to coordinate production on extremely lengthy production processes, intricate, global. They span the globe. And something that's wrecking something that vital to the thing that sustains our life, of course, it raises time preference. It makes us focus on the present and now, and who cares about the future. My wife and I joke all the time, money isn't real, and neither is the future. I mean, we're kind of kidding, but we're also kind of not. How do you plan intelligently for the future in a system that's this corrupt? You look at a guy like Elon Musk, and he looks like a superhero for having plans that extend out tens of generations. and building things. And you can easily see why on the margin, a very thick margin, a lot of the populace doesn't even want to think that way.
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to like epistemology, right? Like, how do we know that what we know? Like, we're told so many things, and I think that if we really examine them, they're just lies. And one of the lies that we're talking about right now is that like uh, consumption boosts the economy, and
Yeah, that's a good one.
like it adds to GDP or whatever in the short term, but it just doesn't. And we can get confused because we're trying to think about like a country or even the world, and it's too big to comprehend. Like I think in my like 11th grade economics class, there was I believe, true story of three or four soldiers who were stranded on an island, right? And they had to decide like how to spend their time and energy, purifying water and, trying to gather food and build shelter and all this kind of stuff. And it was really cool. The point is like you have limited
Yeah.
resources, and unlimited demands, and all that kind of stuff. But when you hear these things about like whatever, like I say, consumption boosts the economy. Think about that on an island of like three guys or
Hmm.
10 men and women. Like how does that do that? How do they borrow from their grandkids, supposedly, like we're doing by deficit spending? How does printing up a bunch of new money on this island of 10 people boost the economy? How does consumption boost their economy? The answer is it doesn't. Like what you were saying is like capital investment, building things that will last, researching new technologies, all this kind of stuff like builds the economy for the future. And consumption is just like a statistical boost in the very short term.
No, man, I think that's exactly right. The politicians and economists and other faux wizards of the regime use the complexity in our system to just tell us blatant lies that don't pass the sniff test if you think about it for half a second. And one of the things I love about the methodology of the Austrian School of Economics is they're not trying to lie to you. They will break things down to a simple island scenario to take it down to the nuts and bolts. What is savings? What is capital? What is labor? What is production? What is consumption? And when you take it down to the essentials, all of those falsehoods fall away. You realize that Keynes was a lunatic and Ben Bernanke was a lunatic too. And all these people that are peddling, and I don't even know what an MMT or, this modern monetary theory, they're beyond lunatics. They're the lunatics that the lunatics call lunatics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, this point I was trying to make earlier, we are in a very complex world, and it's easy for us to get hornswoggled because if you're on a desert island, somebody hands you a lump of a lump of garbage and tells you it's coconut, you know immediately that that's not true. That is not a coconut. But in this complex world, we're sold a pack of lies every 4 years, if not earlier. And I think we need to figure out how to wise up.
For sure. All right. I'm going to let that be the final word. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Adam.
No, thank you, David. Let me plug my shows again and my Substack. Go to YouTube, search for Haman Nature, put it in quotes because if you don't, that awesome song by Michael Jackson will flood the screen. Um, so it's at youtube.hamannature. I think that's how it is. Um, and then I have a Substack that I'm also quite proud of. Just go to hamannature.substack.com or just hamannature.com. It also redirects. And this has been great, David. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'll have all the links in the show description. And yeah, you can definitely also search Haman Nature, just like human nature, but with a A instead of the U.
Absolutely.
In fact, it might help Adam's algorithm if you search for it rather than following my links.
I don't believe I'll ever get bigger than Michael Jackson, but I'm willing to try.
All right. For Adam Heyman, this has been David Medley, Proof of Pod. Catch you next week.